Jess. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we'll just get straight into it. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I would say, like, the worst at describing myself. Um, I, God, where do I start? I have lived in, like 4 or 5 different cities now, like, which is kind of interesting. I've got one sister. My dad passed away this year. Gosh, just getting right into it. And then I don't know. I don't know how to like word who I am. That's like the hard one. I'm sorry.
What was your
Like
childhood like? What were your earliest childhood memories? The ones that you liked and the ones you didn't like?
this is where I was gonna say like it might like come across as like me joking too much about it, but it's kind of like I look back and I laugh at this because I kind of like the comic part of it. I actually had a conversation with some of my friends. Like, I think this is the first instance because I'm bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this was like the first instance where like that popped up in my mind. But like my first coherent thought was just like sitting there and like I didn't understand the concept of death, obviously. I was just like sitting there thinking like I don't want to be here, like I don't want to exist, and like I didn't know what that necessarily meant. And I like remember like
How old were you
crying
when you?
5 like my first like real like conscious thought, cuz I just like didn't really like even before that, like my childhood was like kind of chaotic anyway. But I think when I had like a moment to step back and kind of think like I don't want to exist, like that was like the first like full like I am a person on this earth kind of thought. And I remember just like sobbing, and my mom like came into my room and she goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, I don't want to be here, like I don't want to exist, you know. And like she just was like, "Well, what do you mean?" I was like, "I don't know." And then I just like went back to like playing with my toys and like told her like, "Okay, you can go now." You know, and like nothing really followed up from that. But I think if like I could kind of like get on the conversation a little bit like more of like me growing up being bipolar and not understanding, like there were so many times that I feel like I would like have those thoughts. And like I grew up in a very religious household that like you didn't talk about like mental health. You like didn't do that, you know? It's so like for me, if I would ever like feel anything like building up or like I'll get into this later, but I felt like my role in my family, because like my mom was like divorced at this time, my dad like wasn't around, it was just like my sister, my mom, and I. And like my value was bringing like, no, this is shocking, but like jokes into the scenario. That's like what my role was like growing up. And if I didn't give that, like I didn't get attention, or like I wouldn't like, I would be told to like shut up, you know, essentially. And so like I think for me, like growing up being bipolar, like having like negative thoughts and trying to talk about them and being told like, "Oh, you're a kid, you don't have real problems," kind of like spun into like me again not fully understanding how to like deal with those like issues, or like if I would like be upset, like I would just like, you know, let them build, or I'd like go and like self-destruct, I guess, in a sense, like on my own, you know. And
When did you get diagnosed with being bipolar?
when I was, I think it's like kind of fuzzy because like high school is like a little fuzzy for me, but it was either like my senior year or right when I graduated. It was like right around that time. And my mom finally went, "I want you to sit down and like talk to somebody." First time in my entire life, you know. And so I like sat down and I was, you know, like talking about this with this like therapist, and he goes, "Well, like tell me more about like the thoughts you get, or like tell me more about like how you feel like on your own or whatever." And I just like opened up, you know, and I told him like some of the things, and he was like, "Well, that kind of sounds like like bipolar, and like we got a little more into it, and I was like, no, I don't want that label, you know? And so he was like, well, how do you handle situations where like you're like mad, or like what sets you off? And I was like, nothing really. Sometimes like I'll just like be mad. And he was like, it sounds like either like BPD wasn't really much of a huge thing when he was talking to me about it, but he said it sounds like bipolar. And I was so mad at that because there's such a stigma with people being bipolar that, like, especially at that time of like people being bipolar is like you assume somebody who's gonna just like go into a rage and like
Or start crying out of nowhere.
just, especially at that point, it was more like people like had a stigma, especially in St. Louis where I was still living, that like you were violent, you know? And I was so mad about that. And I was like, basically said, fuck you. And then like walked out and was like, I'm not doing this. And then I ended up, when I lived in Arizona, like this was like years later, like probably closer to like 7-8 years later after the initial.
So you didn't handle the diagnosis pretty well.
No, probably. I probably walked away and he was like, "Proven my point." And I'm like, how dare you? And like,
So you try to deny it, or like, no, this isn't true.
in probably the most bipolar fashion you could ever have. And I think that's what's so funny looking back, because I was like, wow, you really did not handle that one well, Jess. And then when I went and made the decision myself in Arizona to go, and like, I was like already in like couples therapy, and then I was like, I'm going to go and do therapy on my own too. And I like went to therapy, really like went through these sessions and like took it seriously. I was in a better space to like handle. And they said, yeah, you're like bipolar. And like
How'd you take it?
reiterated.
Yeah. How'd you take it that time?
I was like, bummer. I was like, R.I.P. to that one therapist, and I screamed.
This is not the first time I've heard this.
Yes. I was like, I've had years to like cope with this and like kind of like figure out a good mantra for me to get through. And it was great. This therapist, like, she worked with me really well. She offered medication. I said, I don't really want to do that because there are so many things that I feel like I've seen friends in my group like get on medication for depression or like bipolar or whatever it is, and like some of that changes your brain chemistry, and if it's not what you need, it could really mess you up. And I was like, I just don't feel like I can do that. Like, I don't think that's something that like, and that's also not me saying that like people who take medication shouldn't do it. I just didn't think it was like a good thing for me, you know, if that makes sense. Like, I think that I have had to go so many years kind of like figuring out like the highs and lows of this, that I think introducing something else would just throw the balance off, and I'd be like reworking from like point one again, you know, or like square one again. And
So you've already found a way to manage it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to add something else and figure out what the highs and lows are going to be with the
yeah,
medication.
and having to, yeah.
Isn't it still good to just have the medication just in case for a little bit of help every now and then?
But yeah, I think for a lot of people, yeah. Like, I don't think for me though. Like, I think that like I am so scared to do it because like there's such a teeter where like I am very disciplined. Like, I know when not to say that I know exactly when like the manic or like the depressive episodes are coming up, but I prepare myself really, really well. And like, I know for a good portion, like when my brain is telling me certain things, like it's how your brain is working. It's not always like the truth. Like, let's like deep dive. And like, I take the time in my own head to kind of figure out what my perception is and what reality is, you know? And I think that like I started doing that when I was like 15, you know? And I think that like adding something into the equation scares me because it's so easy to like rely on something and maybe like, again, I've seen so many friends go through this where like you start to rely on it and then like you don't really feel like you have to put the mental work in as much. And then like, say you have a really bad month that like even medication isn't helping like balance, like you could slip, you know, and like I don't want that. I just don't want like anything to go wrong mentally for me. And I feel like that sounds psychotic, but like I feel like the balance I've found works really well for me. And like,
Can you talk about that balance that you
yeah.
have?
Yeah. I feel like
Let's
it's
talk
good.
about this balance that you've the Jess way, the Jess protocol.
So I have to probably take you back to when I first started doing this. Like, obviously growing up being bipolar, like you don't handle like negative like thoughts or like emotions super great. And so like I like my poor sister like got the brunt of a lot of it. Like I'd either scream at her or like I would like, you know, like try to beat her up. And so I was like, okay, don't do that. Like you can't resort to that every time. You need to know when you're starting to get riled up. If you're going through like because you can have depressive modes, like you can be angry, manic, you can be angry as well. And I think that people don't always realize that, but like the manic ones were like the worst for me when I was like mad. And because like you're almost like you get this like God mantra in your head sometimes, and if somebody like challenges you or tells you you're wrong, you're like, how dare you step into like, I don't know, it like sounds psychotic.
Some people do that without being
Without,
bipolar.
yeah.
What's the diagnosis for that?
100%. And that's not the only example, of course, but I feel like for me, especially like being in high school, like that was the huge, like you already have all these hormones going on. So like it just all melded together. And so I was like, okay, I need to figure this out because like I can't resort to, you know, like hurting other people because of like what I'm going through, you know? And so like I started doing this thing that I call like rewiring my brain, which sounds psychotic, but I really liked to draw growing up, and I would just like listen to music, and what I would do while I'd be drawing, it would like actively help me focus on things. And I would like sit there and I would think about like, okay, well, this happened through the day. Why did that set you off? Like, why did that make you so mad? And I would tie it back to other things that people had like said or done to me that I felt like I was projecting that anger on, you know? And so I started to like, and I still do it to this day. I'll like trace back if something makes me angry or like makes me upset or even happy. I feel like I do this if I'm like happy. I'll like think back to like, oh, what did this remind me of? Or like, why does this make me happy or whatever? And I just like link it back to a bunch of different things. And it helps me be more self-aware about balancing every single emotion, you know? And so I kind of like kind of go into like robot mode sometimes and trying to like, especially being like manic or depressive, like depressive, I feel like I'll try to like inwardly numb that feeling in a sense. That again sounds very scary, but I'll try to remind myself like this is like your brain, like go into logic mode. Like I kind of like go into like the like problem solving, like work, for instance. I like thrive in that, and I'll kind of like think about that, and I like don't really think about like emotions as much. And then like even when I'm like manic, you know, and I'm like super just riding high, feeling great, I'll have to bring myself down, you know, like I have to go like, you could still be better, you know, you could still work on these things. Like I try to just whatever is going on, like balance like the emotions in a sense by like, again, like tracing back to other things or like remembering this is how I handled this and this worked really well, or, you know, just, it sounds like crazy, but it like, it works for me, you know, like, I don't know.
What was your relationship with your parents like growing up?
Oh my God. Ugh, spicy. My dad was like, I was always like closer with him, but we're gonna get right into that one. My dad, I didn't really get to see much growing up. He like went to jail 3 times, like in the span of me like growing up for embezzling money from like his jobs. And like that was, and like I was still as a kid didn't really understand like why, you know, but I would still like write to him. We'd go visit when he was out of jail. Like again, I didn't really have the concept of like what had happened like super well. Like when I got older and I kind of started understanding, I was like, ew, not good, like, but I can still separate and love the person, not the actions. And I think that, like, while that's nothing that I would ever condone, he and I definitely got along. My mom and I, way different story. Um, I have not spoken to her in what, like 2 years now? 2 years. And my sister also, same thing, like, does not speak to my mother. Um, and like, I kind of feel bad saying that, but like, my mom and I never really had a great relationship. Like, we never really saw eye to eye. She actively ignored a lot of the, like, kind of weaponized, like, knowing that there was something mentally not right with me.
How'd she weaponize it?
Well, she would like if I had an outburst or if I was like dealing like in high school, like I definitely participated in self-harm. Like that's how I got through balancing emotions so I wouldn't take it out on other people. Definitely don't need to do that now, but like that's what I kind of like didn't understand what else to do. And so she like found out about it and like instead of like talking to me, like would just say like we're gonna have you committed, this is like embarrassing. Like that was like the attitude I had all of growing up. Was like you're an embarrassment and like I will have you committed. And like hearing that, especially like it's also why I didn't have the greatest response to like that one like therapist of being like how dare you, like I've already been told I'm like crazy by my own mother. And so I was like, by you like giving me a diagnosis that's like also crazy, like you're feeding into it. It just was like her and I just like never very much got along. And like I think what bums me out the most about that is like we were on like a good track for probably like during lockdown. It was like nice. Like I feel like we had conversations where, like on FaceTime, like I remember being on FaceTime with her, like I felt super lost. I had like finally gotten promoted and like Hyatt, like lost my dream job, like furloughed and everything. And I was like, I don't know when I'm going back. Like I need something to like keep me preoccupied. And I'm in like a new city, and all this stuff. And I'm like talking to her and we like got into my like childhood and I was like, I'm like not always the greatest at like sugarcoating things. Like I don't really like to do that. I feel like it's a waste of time. And so we were like on the phone and she like started crying because she was like, I feel like it's my fault that you like don't know when to like reach out to people or like talk to people when you're upset, because I was like, I never know what a real issue is. Like I don't know. Like I don't understand. I just assume everything is like mild, that I go through. So like I won't talk to people for like weeks if something happens. And so she's like on the phone like crying in front of me and like I was like so tired of like feeling bad for being angry over this that I was like, well, what are you gonna do now? Damage is done. Like I can't unlearn these things. Like I'm in my 30s now, like I can't like go back. And so I was like, it's whatever, kind of just like done. Like don't cry about it, don't be sad about it, it's a thing. Like I'm over it. And but it was a very like her like crying and taking accountability was like the thing I needed. Like I felt like growing up so many times like being told like your problems don't matter and like you like feeling this way is like embarrassing. Like having somebody like take that back and feel really really bad to the point that they're going to cry on camera with you. I was like, wow, this is huge. Like I feel like I'm like finally getting the apology like the apology that I've like always wanted. And then a couple months later I went back to St. Louis and like sitting there, I'm like talking to her and she's like asking about my sister, and she's like, how's Megan? And I was like, she's good. like try to keep it short and sweet. Like, I didn't really want anything. Like, my sister at that point had not spoken to like our mother in like years. And I was like, I'll tell you she's fine, but like, I'm not going to tell you something that like she wouldn't be comfortable with you knowing, you know? And that's not my business to share. And so then she just like goes on a tirade and she goes, you girls didn't even that like have that bad of a childhood, and just like took back everything that she had apologized for like a couple months ago. I'm literally like texting my friend there. I'm like, you gotta come get me. I was like, you gotta come get me, or I'm gonna say some out of pocket stuff. Like, I can't play the game of arguing with my mother who's never gonna change her mind. And that was like the beginning of like the official just like downfall. And then 2021, the last time I spoke to her, like the night before my birthday. Boom. In true like my mom fashion, just like sent me this like book of like what a disappointment I am, like through text, you know. And I was like, wow. Thanks. And then I like just let it slide. I was like, it's your mom, like what do you expect, you know? And so I like didn't say anything back, and then I like got a text from her the next morning like, happy birthday, I love you so much. And like that's what set me off. I was like, at least if you're gonna tell me I'm a disappointment, stick with that, you know. Like don't even tell me happy birthday, that's so insulting. And so I was just like, okay, thanks, like whatever, you know, and let it go. And then a couple of months later, like during lockdown, mind you, like I was like actively like 2020 close to Christmas was like trying to like actively throughout the entire time they were reopening stuff, like trying to find other jobs, and like also having family members tell me like, don't do that, like you need to stay home, like you have an autoimmune, if something happens like you're gone, you know. And still hadn't found anything. And like that's when they were like talking about like with the like whatever, like the unemployment and stuff, they were going to cut it off and everything. And I was like, man, like I don't even have like money for food or whatever. And so I couldn't like get anybody like Christmas gifts that year. And I was like very,
I see the scars on your.
yeah, you know, try to cover them with tattoos doesn't 100% work. But yeah, like you can 100% see them. Like they will be there forever, which is like kind of a good reminder for me in a sense.
When's the last time you cut yourself?
Oh, God.
Don't tell me it was yesterday.
Oh, hell no. Hell no. I would say it's probably been like 4 or 5 years.
Are
I
you
would
proud
say.
of that?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like the fact that I don't need that as a crutch anymore, like that's amazing.
How'd you turn that leaf?
I just like, I was like, first of all, that's embarrassing. And like, second of all, like, just like, it's embarrassing to like have to hide it, you know? And like, knowing that you're just like, the fact that you're doing this and like, you feel the need to hide it from people close to you is like, ew, you know? And it's just another thing that like, again, and I don't want to say like, I have such a weird, like I've thought about this a lot. I've like such a weird internal relationship with that, because I feel like definitely would never glorify doing that. I feel like anybody who does that, not a good idea, like don't. But I feel like it taught me a lot of lessons, you know, and like I think that that's something that like that's where I'm trying to toe the line. Like I would never want somebody who's ever like been through self-harm to feel disgusted by like what they did. Not a little bit, like feel a little disgusted so you never like go back, you know. But like I feel like don't ever feel like something that you've done in the past like you can't learn from, and there's always something, there's beauty in that, you know, like learning from like, hey, I never have to do this again, being able to look back and go, wow, what a different person I was. And like it's crazy that like I got through doing all of this, and now I can look back and be like, would never do it again, you know. Like I think that's very cool.
What's your advice to somebody who is
I would say
self-harming right now?
that one's like hard, because I feel like for me, I think like what finally like my inner hype person what finally like broke that for me was kind of thinking like I don't need this anymore, and like I like be stubborn, you know? Like I think just being very stubborn and going like, "Hey, instead of like using my time to do this or like something that's harmful, like do something that would benefit you to like help you grow." Like why do you feel like you're doing this? Like why do you feel like it's a release? Like why do you feel like there's not another thing that
What
could
were the answers to those questions for yourself? Why were you doing that? Why
yeah.
was it a release?
Yeah. Like
I want to know.
it's gonna again sound so psychotic, but like again, like feeling so like I think people do it for different reasons, and like the main one I've heard is like sadness. For me was feeling so numb, you know, like I just wanted to feel something, like I just felt numb. And whether or not that was like I couldn't even feel like emotional pain anymore, you know, like I wanted to feel physical pain, you know. And like that would kind of like wake up like that side of me, and then like it like got to the point where like when I would cut, and I remember this like it was like yesterday, and like I would like cut, and then I would just like instantly start crying. It was like everything that was like stuck inside of me like finally was able to, and like I could have that cry release and then go back to normal, you know. It was like the only way I could get that out. And I think that like now it's kind of crazy that like I don't need to do that anymore. Like I think now just like allowing myself to feel, but also like knowing on what spectrum I can do that without spiraling, you know, I think is a good thing. Like it takes wisdom, it takes a lot of self-reflection, it takes time. Like you have to have the want. You can't just one day go, "Oh, I shouldn't do this anymore." Like you need to want to not do that anymore, you know.
What
That's
made
the
you?
difference.
What was that turning of the leaf? That want moment for you of like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore.
This would probably be like I think having like friends talk to me about it, like you know, like being so abrasive. I say that in such a loving way, but like so abrasive over the sense of like you need to stop letting yourself get so numb to the point that you need to do this. Talk to people. You know, like I think finally understanding like the full aspect of like people genuinely caring, and like the effect it has on people who do care about you, seeing you like go down a road like that. It's dark, you know. And like this is probably like the when you ask me what are the three worst things that have happened to you in your life, it's hard to pick.
When did I ask you that?
Like I still remember because I have thought a lot. I've
Oh, you
thought a
told me.
lot.
Yeah, I asked you. I was like, "What's the hardest thing you've been through?" And then you're like, "Where do I start?" Okay, give me
And
the
then we
top
went-
three. Give me the top three.
And I was like, wow, buddy. And there have been a lot. But I would probably say one of the worst, and like I battled with this a lot. Like I feel like it was also the worst and the best in a sense for me to like hear this. I had already like gotten over like the self-harm part, but I feel like physically, like the mental part is like something I was still like going through, you know. Like you kind of self-sabotage yourself a lot in like situations, and like I am like the worst person to myself. I think we all can say that about ourselves, but like the way I go about it is like bad. Like the things I think about myself, awful. And so like during lockdown again, it was very therapeutic. I think this was probably as ironic as it was like the worst and best year for me, because I feel like I got a lot of insight and like a lot of validation that I had never gotten before. And we already talked about the one for my mom, and like my sister, like I'm very close with her. Like we both went through like the same but also like different versions of like childhood, you know? And like her and my mom were like really close growing up. I was like the one who was like kind of ostracized, you know? Like my sister was still like there for me when I needed her, but like it's still lonely, you know? And she very much owned up to that. Like over at her apartment, we're like chilling, like a couple White Claws in, and we're just talking about like our childhood, which was amazing because we just used to ignore it. We just, no, don't talk about it. It didn't exist.
So your childhood was amazing as long as you ignored what didn't exist. I'm curious. What was that?
My emotions. If I ignored that, then yeah, 100%. Actually, no, it still was awful. But
Awful internally? Were there any external factors that you would also, what were the
yeah,
external factors that you would rate as like,
I mean, one would be, you know, like living in Pennsylvania, like having this like normal childhood, and the next thing you know, your mom's like throwing you in a car and like driving you across country back to St. Louis with like no words, you know, like no explanation, like show up at your Nana's house and you're like, what are we sleepover? Cool. Like, what are we doing? You know, and no explanation. Like couple days go by. I'm the first one to ask. I'm like, hey, mom, when's dad coming? You know, and she goes, he's not. Like, no other explanation than that. And so, like, I think that was like the beginning of me feeling like things were gonna be chaos and like things were like out of my control, you know?
so you were just
And
left with the big question mark and just
yeah, like like
no way to make sense of what was happening?
yeah, and like I think that was also like the beginning of like the downfall of like my relationship with my mom, because I was like, now you're not being honest. And again, I was 5. Like let me remind you what a little psychopath I was, that I was like aware of all of this. You know, I was like, I feel like I can't trust you because I know something is wrong and you're not telling me. Like, as a kid, to like know that, like me looking back and realizing that, I was like, wow, that's crazy, you know? But I feel like she like put us in situations like we should not have been in. Like, it just,
Such as?
uh, she remarried like when I was 11, and it was like, we were going to this church, and already a great start. We were going to this church for a while, and we had like a new like one of the pastors like start there or whatever. And so her and like this pastor started talking, you know, and like start dating. And he like showed so many red flags of like being verbally abusive, and she still married him. And what made it worse was
And
like,
this was the pastor of the church?
one of them.
One of the
Like
pastors?
he wasn't like the official, like the like top tier
He was
pastor,
like
but he was like one of them.
associate pastor or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
You know,
God,
the-
it's been way too many. It sounds like been too many
You know,
years
there's a
outside
difference.
of the
There's a
church.
deacon, there's a
Yeah.
pastor, there's an usher.
There's so
Youth pastor.
many. Yeah, and he was like a couple's like therapist.
He was
on the
he was a
side,
therapist too?
Yeah. I don't
Yeah,
know. Like,
yeah, wow.
I think that was like like just through the church though. I think that was like a self-given title. He was insane. And like,
So how did that affect you? You seeing
no,
that
it also
dysfunction?
would like affect me, like, because I was like he wanted everybody to like bend to his will. And I've always been somebody, I'm like, no, like, you're not my dad. Like, you can be respectful and I will give you that respect back, but like, I'm 11. Hello. You're like, no, who are you? You know,
Yeah, I
you
just met you.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
need to like do the work to get me to like treat you like my father
Yeah,
figure.
you need to build the trust.
Yeah. But like one of the things that like he hated, like I had night terrors growing up. This was like the first, like we moved into his house. This was like the first house growing up that like my sister and I like did not share a room. And so like I like struggled with that a lot because I would wake up like horrible night terrors, like freaked out. And so I would like go and like crawl into my sister's bed with her, you know, when I'd wake up because I'd be so freaked out. And like she was always like so like willing, would be like, come in, like just go back to sleep. Don't worry, whatever. Like, I'm here. And he would go downstairs to the basement where our rooms were to like check if I had gone into a room, and would physically like jerk me out of the bed, drag me back into my room, and like throw me, and then like threaten me if I would do it again. And then I got to the point where I was like, I'm petty. I was like, one thing you need to know, you tell me to do something in a disrespectful manner, oh, I will never do it. Like, even if I know that you're going to put your hands on me, 100% I will give you a reason to do that. Would not recommend. That's just how I was as a kid. But I like started, even if I wouldn't have like night terrors at night, I would go into her room because I was like, now I'm going to piss you off because like you should never do that. And then like finally, like my mom left him because he threw shoes at me one night, and he was just like, I don't understand what I did wrong, you know. And then like anyway, like months later, my mom was like, yeah, she was like, well, like, first of all, this was a very messed up day. Like, we were, like, talking about how, like, shitty that situation was. And then she goes, well, Jess wanted, like, a dad in her life. And, like, pinned it on me. And I'm like, sitting there. And I was like, no, I, like, wanted to be able to see our dad more. Like, I didn't want you to remarry.
So your mom said that she married the abusive associate pastor
because it was my fault.
Because you needed a dad in your life. Well, couldn't she have picked someone who was a little bit nicer?
I think my sister kind of like, so we would like talk shit about the crazy stuff that would come out of my mom's mouth. And she like fucking walked away. Like later on, we're just in there and like we're just sitting in silence. I'm like sitting there and I'm like, wow, this is awkward. It's my fault, you know? And so Megan just sits there and she goes, could have found a nicer one. Just like randomly, we'd been sitting there in silence.
How do you feel when that relationship was finally over? And how old were you when that relationship was over?
It was nice. Like she only stayed with him for like 9 months, so I either was like turning 12. Yeah, it was super quick. But like, yeah, like I felt like it was nice, but like my mom was like even worse after that. You know, like just like unhinged. Like I think that my mom is also bipolar, but would never like accept it, you know, because like she will, or BPD very well, like could be more of a thing because like we would be like fine, just having a normal like night. And then she would just like scream at my sister and I for like nothing, you know, like that was like our childhood in a nutshell, in a sense of just like having somebody like kind of like.
So extremely chaotic with your dad, jail, in and out, getting up and moving, bringing in the new guy being abusive, you not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
No stability.
Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of messes you up. It messes your internal system up.
You just kind of get to, and then like all of that already having like a chemical imbalance to your brain, you're like, cool, bet. Like, keep it coming, I guess. Like, how do you welcome peace into your life? What are your moments of peace now? I feel like that is actively the main thing that I search for. Like, that's also, again, like, why I cut my mom out of my life? Like, peace. That's all I want. You know, like, I have such an incredible group of people in my life that I feel like it blows my mind every day, you know, to be honest, because like that's not what I knew growing up. Like I knew people were like selfish. Like that's the only thing that I like had in my mind. Like people turn their backs on you when you need them the most. So that's like what I'm used to, you know. And I think like looking around and having people like actively be like, no, like I want to be there for you, blows my mind every day. Like I don't know like what I did to deserve that, but I feel like it's like crazy. Like that's the peace that I want. That's all I care about. You know, like like when people ask me like what do I want out of life? That's the main thing. Like I just want my core group of people in my life, and like if other things work out, great. but that's not what I'm focused on. Like, I'm focused on, like, my people, you know? Like, that's the biggest thing to me.
What was the number 2? We had the
we
top
didn't
3.
Even know. We didn't even get through number 1.
We haven't gone through number 1? Okay, let's finish number 1.
Number 1, like, still, I'm, like, talking to my sister, like, for, you know, like, over at her place, having a couple White Claws, whatever, talking about, like, our childhood and everything, and it was just very therapeutic to me. We were kind of joking about it and whatnot, and then she, like, brings up, this is probably the most, I'm gonna, like, try to not get super emotional because I'm not good with that, but, like, this is the thing that I, like, still haunts me. She was talking about, this is also toe and toe with, like, me finalizing, like, no more, like, self-harm or, like, doing anything crazy. But, she told me, she goes, yeah, like, I remember when, like, you would, like, take a bunch of pills and, like, drink a bunch, and I didn't know that anybody else knew I was doing this. So this was already, I'm, like, sitting there, like, kind of buzzed, just like, what? Mm-hmm. So she goes, I would, like, crawl into your bed when you would be getting ready to go to sleep and just, like, lay with you. And I remember that because, like, she used to, like, come in and I would be like, the hell, like, we were not affectionate, you know. She would, like put my head in her lap, like, be, like, petting my hair, and I was like, what the fuck? What, like, we don't even hug. I was like, the fuck are you doing in here? Petting my hair. And then she goes, I would just, like, lay there and, like, see you fall asleep and, like, pray that you, like, would wake up the next day. And I was like, oh my God. Like, that is probably the most humbled I have ever been in, like, my actions, if, like, affect other people. And I was just like, holy shit, you know. And I was like, I am so sorry that I ever put you through that. Like, I have cried about this so many times that, like, that's the one thing that I feel like gets me the closest to being emotional, but I'm like, I can't, like, I will never.
So you felt, you said humbled, did you feel super loved? I would assume, like, you're like,
yeah,
wow.
But it also, like, humbling in a sense of, like, you assume that, like, what you're going through, it's just you, like, it's not hurting somebody else. And, like, the fact that somebody who has, like, genuinely had my back my entire life, that I, like, put them in that situation and, like, they never called me out in the moment. They just were, like, genuinely, like, trying to, like, be there for me, but in a very soft mode, which is, like, very not like my sister. Like, she's very, like, abrasive towards me, which is what I need, and I appreciate it. But, like, it threw me off when she told me that. Like, I had no idea that she, like, knew that I was, like, that bad, you know? And so I was just like, true fashion. I was like, sorry, bro. Like, I won't do that anymore, you know? But that was probably, like, I went home and I, like, cried. Like, she did not see that, but I, like, went home and cried because I was like, wow, you were a piece of shit for, like, putting somebody through that, you know? And, like, because you get, like, so lost in thinking, like, oh, I'm, like, I feel this way, and, like, things would be so much easier if I, like, just wasn't here. And then, like, somebody, like, comes out of left field and tells you, like, yeah, that really hurt me that you were going through that. And you're like, oh my God, like, I had no idea, you know? I just, like, always assume, like, I think that was, like, the blind spot finally, like, started to get removed for me, in a sense of, like, I struggle very much with, like, self-worth, in a sense where, like, I think about it a lot. I'm like a side character in a lot of people's lives, you know, which is, like, fine. I don't really ask for much more. Like, I don't really.
I think we're all side characters in everybody else's life.
But it's kind of, like, more so, like people have, like, people they couldn't live without, and I don't see myself like that with anybody, you know, like, which is stupid because, like, I've had people tell me that, and I'm like, yeah, no, you're just being nice, you know, like, that's. And, like, even with me to think that way with my sister is, like, insane. And so, like, when she said that, I was like, oh my God, like, you actually would be, like, devastated if something happened to me, you know? And I don't know, like, it just, like, changed a little bit like of my way of thinking. I still, for the most part, think that way. Like, I'm like, yeah, I'm like somebody who's like funny. I can like offer you a joke or like, you know, but beyond that, like if I tomorrow, like I was just like gone, something happened, I assumed like I would assume everybody would be just like fine, you know, like that's how I think, you know, and I would want it to be that way, like
Well,
genuinely.
life would go on,
Yeah.
but you would be missed. Like people would be devastated.
I would not.
You know,
want
my
that.
no,
I'm
there's,
like,
there's no.
remember
Well,
what chaos.
you know your sister for sure. You know,
Yeah.
I think when I had a cousin who committed suicide, he hung himself in the back porch. You know, and I remember just being devastated and not knowing, well, kind of feeling like, man, he had to have felt really low to do that. Like the internal
Yeah.
struggle to actually follow through must have been hell on earth for him over here.
Yeah.
And but then to see the aftermath, to see the pain in my aunt, like, you know, a year later we went in and to say hello, and you know she's still crying.
Yeah.
And that's an impact that I don't know how you quantify that, but like there's a sorrow that's left in people's hearts.
Yeah. It like 100%, like I have that for people, and not to say like 100% like that. I still have.
But I still think you have to live for yourself, though.
100%.
Because I do think that people will let us down, even
Yeah.
the closest ones to us.
Yeah.
And
we're all human.
exactly. And
Yeah.
if your zest for life has to be from a deep part within yourself, but it's also knowing that you're loved here
Yeah.
and that you love yourself. But if you struggle with self-worth,
Yeah.
how do you, you know what I mean?
I think for me, it's more like, and it's not like I definitely have had like the suicidal tendencies in the past, would never do it now. Like that's not something that, but I'm like, I also, you know, have some medical issues. That's where I try to think of like, for me to like internally prep. I think for me to like make myself feel better about that, like if something were to happen to me, I'm like, yeah, people would be fine, you know, and like that's comforting to me, you know, like I know how people are like, I think most of us like want to feel missed. I do not. Like I don't want any. I don't like not.
So
That
you're
sounds
here
bad.
because you want to be here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, like
What's the...
it's more out of sheer stubbornness.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of like meh. You know, like I didn't die, so I'm like still here. Gonna ride it. You know, like
What are
whatever.
some of the best parts of life for you right now?
Making people laugh is like my absolute favorite thing. Like the biggest when people, and it's, I think the parts that get me the most is like, this is also where I feel like that toxic parenting, thank you mom, came into to good use. Cause like, again, that was my role as a kid, like making people laugh, you know? And I think now, if I say something that's like so authentic and like I won't even think that it's that funny, it will just come out of my mouth and people will like die. Like I'll look over and people are like wheezing and I'm like, bet.
You have a very, very dark sense of humor. I've been privy to it.
It's so bad. It's because like for me, like how I like grew up, and even this is one thing I will say, like you cannot get along with somebody, or like you can think they're toxic, but like my mom did implant some really good seeds like in my head. And going through all of the shit that we went through, and like we'd sit there and like just joke about it, be like, wow, you know, like when we left my stepdad, she was like, wow, what a winner I picked. You know, like we were just like laughing about how stupid, you know, like how stupid that situation was. And she would just say like, what are you gonna do? Like, are you gonna sit there and roll over and like mellow too hard in these moments? Or are you gonna laugh about it? And I feel like I took that and ran with it. You know, I was like, yeah, laugh about it. Like, how else, like, yeah, take the moments where you need to. Like, I still do this. I'll like go home and ugly cry sometimes and like get through some stuff. Like, you have to feel, you have to let yourself go through that.
So you have to laugh too.
Yeah. Like, you have to look back and like just like think about like, wow, that was crazy. Like, like most of my childhood, I
Do you
look
think
back.
it's crazy that that shit is crazy?
And you want to know what's even worse about that? I didn't know that shit wasn't normal until I was like 14. Like,
You
had
found
no...
out sooner than me. 14.
What age were you?
This is, let's see, I got out of prison 22 and a half. I didn't really have, maybe at 28. I was like, oh,
Shit, dude. Well, I can't say like all of it. Like, I think like I started to see like a glimpse that it wasn't like normal until I was like 14. You know, like my mom, I think she knew that like or like childhood was like so fucked up that she had instructed my sister and I. She was like, don't talk about your home life to like your friends.
Do you think there is a perfect childhood out there?
Oh, hell no.
I don't think so.
No.
I'm not sure
No.
there is.
And like, I mean, that's as there should not be, but I think
There's
that,
levels
like,
though.
It would have been nice instead of being like here.
On this bracket, maybe a bracket.
Maybe just like a little closer, you know, would have been nice. Like, that would have been cool. But like, she used to tell us, she was like, don't like talk about your childhood with your friends. And I was like, oh, like, that's weird. But like we're private, like we're kind of like a private family, like whatever. And I like hit high school and like I went over to one of my friends' houses, like for I think the first time. And she lived like super close to me. And so we're like hanging out, you know, whatever. And like, they're Italian, they're kind of loud, you know, and like, so I like started to get uncomfortable because if people raise your voice in my family, you're about to get whacked, you know, like that's how I like,
You just get smacked right across the face. If you raise it.
well, me more so, like, because I was again like ADHD, bipolar.
Did it work? Probably not.
No.
I would assume it didn't work.
No. And then that's with that technique.
This is what kills me. Parents who use corporal punishment will be nice and call it corporal punishment. We'll give the term out there. Once you see the strategy is not working,
you gonna move on, or are you gonna try something?
I don't understand why there isn't some different,
Like my mom did. She moved on. She upgraded.
What did she upgrade to?
Just screaming in my face, and that was enough to do it because loud noises terrify me.
So she found something that worked.
Oh yeah, that's all she needed to do. I would just be melted, and then I finally hit an age where I was like, yeah, you're all bark and no bite anymore. And then I would scream at her, you know? And so it was, and then it would just get to the point where I'd like tire myself out and be over like yelling. But so then my mom would throw in, you're going to be committed. And that worked for a while. It just went up a tier, you know? Went up a little bit. And,
any means necessary, I guess. Your mom was any means, whatever's got to be done.
she was like, listen, we're going to one up it again.
And don't tell anybody at school about what I'm telling you here, okay?
That's 100%. That was my childhood. Mom? No.
So when you went to school and you talked to somebody about it.
Oh, no, I didn't. I
didn't?
did not. I just happened to like fourth or fifth time I went over to my friend Hannah's house, and like, I love her family. They are very loud though. And so I would like go over and like, this is just like how my friend Hannah is. Like, for me, I'm like, I was raised to never talk to your parents like this, but like, she's loud, you know, like they're fiery. So she's like in the kitchen with her mom. I'm like sitting in the living room. There is a full on wall blocking me from like knowing the visual context of this, but they are like screaming at each other, you know, and I was like shaking, you know? And so like, I just hear like Anna like yelling at her mom. She's like, shut up, you bitch, you know, and like all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, shit's about to, I was like, I could sneak out, but then I feel like that's rude, you know? And so I'm like getting anxiety about having anxiety sitting there. And so they finally like come around, you know? And so like Jeannie, her mom looks at me and she goes, are you okay? And I was like, should I go? I was like, I can go right now. I was like, I'm so sorry. I was like, Anna, you shouldn't talk to your mom like that. And so then they go, oh, that's just how we talk to each other. It's fine. Like, we're good. We're just joking. And I was like, so horrified because I was like, what? And so Jeannie's like, are you okay? You're like shaking. And I was like, it's just if I talk to my mom like that, like I would like be smacked or like sent away or something, and like kind of like made a little joke about it.
Or
But
maybe
like
committed, depending on the.
it's whatever it is. If it's a Tuesday, she'll threaten committing. If it's Wednesday, she'll smack me. Like Thursday, there's different ones on the calendar. You just go look. It's fine. No, like
So I know all that stuff. Being
yeah,
myself, I was abused as a kid. At some point, like you have to process the hurt.
yeah.
How did you process the hurt from your youth?
I think that like for me, the way that I make sense of a lot of things is like what I've learned from it. And I think that like someone else going through that, and this is where like my relationship with my mom, or like my lack of relationship with my mom, like is kind of sad, because I like think about it a lot and I'm like, that is an issue on you, and I am very sorry that you felt the need to do that, but like I don't take that on myself. Like that is not my hurt for you to like. I'll deal with like my side of things, and I'll like think about like, wow, I made it through that. That's crazy. And I genuinely like walked out of that situation being empathetic and like caring about people and would never want to tear anybody down. And I'm like, then you're on the other side of the fence. Like you want people to feel bad, and like I kind of let myself win on that a lot. Like it's going through stuff like that. The one brag that I give myself is like going through that and coming out of it genuinely never wanting anybody to feel the way I did growing up, or like going through anything at all chaotic, or like at least letting know, like people know who went through something similar, like, hey, you can get through anything. Like if an idiot like me can figure it out and get through, anyone can do it. Like it's just like that's probably the biggest thing that I feel like has helped me step away and not live in that mode as much. Like my sister and I have talked about it a lot, and like she's like taken away different lessons than like what I would fully like think would be good for me. Like my sister kind of like, it's like crazy to go through like similar stuff and like come out of it like so like with such different thoughts. Like I love her and this works for her, and I think it's great. Like I think that like we complement each other really well. But like Megan is like very much like, I'm gonna do what I want to do, and like as you should, and me, I like took away, I was like, I'm gonna like take care of everyone around me. Like it's like crazy. Like I just,
What are the things you do to take care of yourself right now? And this is as of late.
it's a good question. I think that like still going through those modes of like thinking a lot of things through. Like I psychoanalyze myself a lot, which again sounds kind of crazy, but like it's therapeutic for me. I think like what I do is I try to just like think of how far I've come and like how I can evolve a lot of like the rewiring my brain techniques that I do and everything, or like spending time with people I feel like genuinely are just like give me like peace. I feel like I don't need much to like feel taken care of. Like I don't really need that much. I think most of it like comes from me, but yeah, actively like seeking out and like spending time with people, I feel like, or like just taking weeks where I have days off and not talking to a single soul. It's amazing. Like that sounds so bad, but like I like that. Like I like taking the time to just like reset, and like read not have to like put on a front in front of people, because it is like I like to be funny and lighthearted, but it does start to take a toll. So like taking that time for myself and just being like, I can just sit there and not feel like I have to like be entertaining, you know, like you just sit there and stare at the wall if I want and it's fine, you know, like sounds weird, but like if I could just like go, wow, I don't have to have a thought in my brain. This is great, you know? Yeah.
All right, so I would want to get into number 2 of the hardest thing, but I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 of,
I'm so sorry.
and maybe a part 3, and we just may have to make a series.